I'm Fiona. I'm a political artist and activist and bushfire survivor. 2 years ago today at this time, I was pasting up drawings that my 2-year-old daughter had made at preschool. I was pasting them on her new bedroom wall that we'd made in our family home. Within a few hours, our family realised how dire the situation was, because it was very smoky around that time. There had been fires burning to the west of us, and we'd been in drought for a long time. The day that we lost our house, there was nothing to indicate that we should leave except smoke had covered the sun and there was ash dropping in our front yard. It was obvious to us that we needed to enact our bushfire survival plan and not hang around any longer, get our kid out of there and be safe. But in terms of emergency messaging, there was no fire brigades, there was no helicopters, there was no evacuation warning. And in fact, when we got the evacuation warning via text message, there's no reception at our house. Our house had already been burnt down. Responding and dealing with that situation, both dealing with it politically and personally. In the months after, a bushfire-affected artist residency came up here at the Creator Incubator, and after not having made art for a long time and questioning whether art had the power to make change, I finally felt like it might have had that power if I was going to say the right things. And what I was going to say is that bushfires that took my house were driven by climate change, and I needed to communicate that message, and I needed to respond to politicians' rhetoric at the time that now wasn't the time to talk about climate change and shutting down conversations. When I accepted the bushfire-affected artist residency, my immediate idea was to go and source the remnants of our house and categorise them into what I deemed to be necessary to live in the bush. So groups of shelter, water, food, power, and I grouped them all together. And it was a long process returning to the site and gathering the items and sifting through the ash. I had the idea for the name of the show well before this work was made, and I wanted to convey how futile it is to talk about bushfires and how we fight them without fighting the underlying cause of them, which is climate change. And so this word unpreparable came about, and then I made this work out of garden hoses and plumbing fittings to try and convey the futility of fighting catastrophic fire conditions with a garden hose. Previously in my work, I had explored the notion of shelter for the longest time. So when I arrived here in the Creator Incubator, I again followed through on that theme, but this time it seemed almost quite cruel actually that I was now building houses of the remnants of my own, and I used concrete and reduced the volume of concrete I use with fly ash, which is a byproduct of burning coal, which I thought was a really nice tie-in with the need to address climate change. That was quite a torturous time in my studio actually, because I couldn't reconcile the fact that this material had so many embedded carbon emissions and my work was about addressing climate change. And I put the ash of my house also in most things that I make, so it was embedding it in clay and in concrete and in resin to really speak about the experience and to, it's just integrity. That's my house in my work. And so I've moved through a number of other materials to try and reconcile the carbon emissions in my work, and I've decided not to use concrete anymore. I think as an artist that's worked with found objects most of my practice, what I've realised from working with the materials of my house and my car, for example, is that the materials really do have their own story, and to not try and edit that story too much. For me, it's important to communicate that story as directly as possible, which is why there's a lot of text-based works in my show, and the materials are just really in raw as they are, because they're already embedded with this story of bushfires that I don't really need to say much more for them to tell that. Art allows people time and space to reflect upon the messages that an artist is conveying in their work, where rallies and protests are very loud and in your face. So I think there is definitely room to communicate messages for me around the need to act on climate change in an artistic practice, because sometimes I think art can say what words can't. Our house burned down with 1.4 degrees of warming. At the current rate of emissions, our world is on the trajectory to be even warmer. Can you imagine what the summers are going to look like with 3 to 4 degrees of warming if those bushfires took place with only 1.4 degrees? It's inconceivable how catastrophic they're going to be at that time if we don't act on climate change.